Outlining. Pros and cons. Do you want to outline your novel? Do you outline already? There's different schools of opinion on this. My sense is Amazon Kindle genre fiction writers that we've been discussing, especially in the hot categories, science fiction, romance, mystery, thriller, crime. The writers that do well financially do well for one reason, because they crank books out at a rapid pace, often a book a month. And I think I've discussed this in the previous section. It seemed impossible, and then I began writing a book a month. It's not that hard if you don't worry about the details. You're basically just telling the story. Try to tell a good story, and don't miss any days of writing. Just sit down, give yourself that word count, and stick to it. Don't go to bed until you've hit your count for the day. And it's amazing. You will write the story in a month or 2 months, 3 months, whatever your timetable is. But the successful authors do write quickly. They do feed the readership. And the way to write quickly, I believe, does involve some degree of outlining. I mean, Stephen King, who I respect, he's not my favorite author, but I respect the guy. And the guy puts out 2 massive books a year, 2 like 800,000 page books a year, every year. He's been doing it for about 30 years. So you got to give him credit. He does an outline, and he talks about this. He says the dullards, the dullards outline. That's kind of a cruel assessment. But I've tried it both ways, and I think I do write my best fiction when I don't outline. In fact, my first book in this series, called Who Needs Justice, again, I didn't intend it to be a first in a series. I was just trying to write a book that I had this idea for. I just sat down every day, and I just thought, okay, now what would happen? What would the guy do? What would logically happen today? And you actually get into a kind of a zone where it's hard to believe. I've read authors describing it, and I thought they were overstating it, but it's true. You get into a zone where you actually want to sit down every day and find out what's going to happen. It's almost like you're being told the story, even though you're the one typing it out. It's a weird dynamic, but it does actually happen. It happened to me about a third of the way in, where I just sort of couldn't wait to get up in the morning and get to that keyboard and find out what was going to happen, because I had no preconceived plan. And sometimes one little thing a character might say might paint them in a different light, and all of a sudden that character becomes they might be a minor character to start with. They might become a much more major character, might have a real influence on the story. And it can work the other way too. Something in your head you thought was going to happen doesn't pan out the right way, and the whole storyline sort of fizzles out. If you don't outline, you have the leeway to let any of those things enter into your story. But again, I think my point is, now with Amazon fiction, what I would suggest to you is at least have an idea every day when you sit down of what you're going to write, whether you want to outline precisely or not. There are very complex ways to outline. There's a writer, I believe is Russell Blake, I think is his name. He's very successful, and he color codes and charts and everything else. And he makes sure he has a certain number of plot reversals, and everything's got to kind of fit the formula that he's been successful with, and that the readers have kind of come to expect. And you can't fault him for that. And even he says it's a little bit anal, but it works for him. So again, there are complex ways to outline. There are simple ways to outline. You can just outline with a bunch of bullet points. My recommendation would be, whatever you're comfortable with. If you're an outliner in general in life, like you're going to take a trip, and you're the kind of person that sits there and kind of makes an outline of everything you need to do before the trip, beyond just a list, like a list with a sub list that looks more like an outline, then do that for your book. But above all, I would be flexible. You'll be surprised how often you cannot stick to the outline. Something changes in the book. It goes a different direction. You have to at least be somewhat flexible. Maybe you're not going to change where the story's ultimately going, but you need to be flexible. There's another writer, I think it's, what's the guy's name? John Irving, popular over the years. Apparently he starts every book by writing the first line and then the last line. So all he knows is how it's going to start and then how it's going to end, and then he fills it in. And I think Stephen King shook his head, and how can you do that? That's, if you know how it's going to end, that kind of defeats the whole purpose. But at the very least, as a compromise, I would sit down every day with an idea of what you're going to write. And I think the easiest way to do that is when you finish the previous day's session to make some notes. Take 5 minutes. You've got the momentum. You're tired, you're burned out, but your mind is revved up and you've got your momentum going. And at that point, just either write a paragraph, whatever works for you. Paragraph, 5 bullet points, 10 bullet points, maybe 8 sentences, whatever it takes, or just keywords. But that's what you're going to use when you sit down the next day to get going. Those are my thoughts on outlining. Okay.